This is our presentation on gene editing, ethical and cultural considerations through the Chinese cultural lens by Alex McNally and Nadia. This is an introduction to gene editing. So gene editing, also known as CRISPR-Cas9, allows for the alteration of DNA sequences. It's used to correct genetic defects, treat diseases, and enhance traits. Gene editing is a powerful tool that can potentially eliminate hereditary diseases, but it can also raise the ethical questions revolving around human identity, fairness, and control over biology. We're going to discuss all of these issues culturally, spiritually, ethically, and clinically. So, we'll start off by discussing the Chinese cultural context. So, in China, spending time with family is expected. People respect hierarchy in Chinese culture, and they consider social relations to be a necessary part of community. Families generally have one child, and it isn't common for grandparents to live with the family. Confucianism deeply influences Chinese ethics. For instance, having a strong or deep sense of family and honoring tradition, societal order, and respect for hierarchy. In particular, respect for ancestors, like prioritizing the collective over the individual and valuing harmony, play major roles in public attitude toward family relations and, more specifically, gene editing. The Chinese government's involvement in biotech can shape both acceptance and regulation. This goal of scientific accuracy and use of gene editing in children will only be determined by waiting and watching as new scientific innovations unfold. So let's start by talking about the proponent arguments. So supporters argue that gene editing could prevent suffering and promote public good. So in China, the idea of improving future generations aligns with the idea of maintaining strong family lineage and societal harmony. From a nursing standpoint, the incorporation of genomic information into patient care enables a more personalized and preventative model of healthcare. This acts in accordance with the growing shift towards precision medicine, where nurses can base their teachings and interventions based on a patient's genetic profile. Let's talk about some of the opponent arguments. So, opponents raise concerns about violating natural laws and creating societal inequality. The global scandal involving gene edited babies in China heightened these concerns when two twin girls had been born with an immunity to HIV, especially around consent and unchecked scientific scrutiny. So, although momentous in scientific progress, the work of researchers focusing on gene editing has raised many ethical concerns and, in some cases, even condemnations. For instance, Jian Kui was sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined for conducting illegal medical practices related to gene editing. Let's talk about some of the ethical principles in question. Genome editing sits at the intersection of multiple ethical principles. On one hand, it may offer extreme benefits, but it also risks harm and injustice. In a system that has strong collective values, such as the Chinese cultural system, balancing all of these things becomes even more complicated and uncertain. For instance, Some of the ethical principles in question include autonomy, non maleficence, justice, and beneficence. Those present at the International Summit on Human Gene Editing agree that it shouldn't be used for clinical reproductive purposes until standardized forms are deemed safe through research. Exceptions occur for this statement, though, such as when both parents are determined to be homozygous for a disease causing gene that would result in their child expressing the gene. In any case, there are concerns, like with any new technology, that genome editing innovations will only be available to the wealthy and therefore will create further tensions between societal classes and cause greater divides. Let's talk about stakeholder outcomes. So for patients, gene editing is both a potential benefit and a risk. Healthcare providers face new ethical and clinical responsibilities. When considering gene editing, it's important to examine how different groups are affected, starting with the patients. For individuals and families living with inherited conditions like muscular dystrophy or sickle cell disease, gene editing offers tremendous opportunity. It promises not just treatment, but potential cure. Conversely, patients may also face uncertainty about long-term outcomes, unknown side effects, and ethical questions, especially when editing is done at the embryonic stage without their consent. Cultural and spiritual implications. Culturally, there will always be tensions between innovation and tradition. While improving family lineage is valued, manipulating it too directly may conflict with natural harmony and ancestral respect. Confucian values deeply influence bioethics in China. The emphasis on family lineage and maintaining societal harmony supports the idea of improving genetic health for future generations. In this context, eliminating hereditary illnesses through gene editing could be seen as an extension of filial piety, also known as doing what's best for one's descendants and society. This, however, is not universally accepted. The argument exists that altering the human genome disrupts the natural existence of human life, and in Chinese tradition, honoring ancestors would contradict with genetic manipulation, which would be considered to disrupt the spiritual balance. Let's talk about theological perspectives. Traditional belief systems will shape public attitudes in Chinese culture, particularly Buddhism and Taoism. With these, an emphasis on harmony with nature discourages human interference in natural processes. From a Taoist perspective, altering the genome may be viewed as controlling forces outside our authority. This would be an overstep that could lead to spiritual imbalances or unintended consequences. As well as through the beginning of life, genome editing would be preventing death, which Confucianism sees as natural. Going against that which is natural would be disrespecting one of the core tenets of those beliefs. Let's talk about nursing practice in 10 years. In particular, we'll focus on genetic counseling roles, cultural competence required, ethical and equitable access advocacy as well. So, as gene editing becomes more integrated into clinical healthcare, nurses will play an essential role on the front lines of patient counseling. They will be responsible for not only understanding genetic technologies, but for educating patients about them in a culturally sound as well as ethically sensitive way. So, in China, this means navigating the traditional values while explaining highly technical information. Therefore, what we can learn is that nurses must be trained in genomic literacy. They must be able to explain complex processes in understandable terms, and they must be respectful of patients' beliefs about life, health, and nature. So this slide actually is applicable to basically any culture, not just the Chinese culture, but we want to make sure that we're thinking about, all different types of cultures, because gene editing is definitely something that can come up for anybody who might be affected by an illness, even though our presentation is definitely focused on the Chinese lens. Global risks and concerns. One major concern is the lack of global consensus on gene editing. While China once led the way in rapid development, the backlash from the 2018 CRISPR baby scandal led to stricter national regulations. Conversely, other countries still operate under looser rules and regulations. This patchy set of policies raises the risk of tourism, where individuals could seek genetic modifications in countries with fewer restrictions or regulatory gaps. This could lead to unsafe procedures and exploit vulnerable populations. In addition, it could challenge healthcare providers when patients return to their country of origin or their location of origin with unprecedented alterations. Another possibility would be the establishment of underground markets offering unauthorized gene editing. Without oversight, these practices may ignore safety, ethics, and informed consent. So things like, if people don't have enough money to afford the regular method, or if perhaps what people are trying to seek is not legal, they might basically pursue shadier options or less expensive options that ultimately compromise safety and health. So those are some global risks and concerns. Benefits if regulated. Okay, so let's talk about the alternatives. So what could happen if we did regulate this? So despite the risks, the benefits of ethically regulated gene editing are far-reaching. By targeting the root causes of genetic illnesses, the opportunity is presented to eliminate suffering from diseases like sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, as well as some cancers. From a public health standpoint, this could lead to long-term savings by reducing the burden of chronic disease management. Also, if patients could live longer, healthier lives with fewer medical interventions, that would absolutely be a plus from a overall health and well-being perspective. That's always what we want, is for people to be healthy. So, in summary, this is an ethically complex but promising topic. Gene editing is not just a scientific breakthrough. It's a complicated ethical and cultural challenge. In China, traditional Confucian values intersect with a national push for biotechnological leadership. This creates a unique environment where advancement is encouraged, but cultural harmony is still expected to be respected. As nurses, we are at the intersection of science and comforting care. We have to understand the values that shape our patients and advocate for that, for care that is both advanced and ethically grounded. Whether gene editing becomes mainstream will depend on how well we balance its potential with the cultural makeup of the communities we serve. Here are some of the group contributions for our project. This was a collaborative effort, with Nadia focusing on the science of gene editing and its technological capabilities, as well as the cultural and spiritual dimensions specific to the Chinese context. Alex led the analysis of ethical principles and stakeholder outcomes, as well as implications for nursing practice, and also compiled the APA references. Thank you for listening to our project covering gene editing, ethical and cultural considerations. Here are the references in APA format. Thank you for listening and have a great day.